curiosity. My name is Doriel, and it's Larrier, who is the host of the Lott Carey Wise Digital Couch. And we are going to have our episode 29. I wanted to give a little precursor of what's happening tonight. Yes, we are talking to Reverend Dr. Harold Dean Trulear about the topic of incarceration. As always, I want to make sure that I give a little disclaimer because this is a touchy subject and some people may feel a little uncomfortable. So if you need to slide over, no problem, please do that. If you are going to stay, I need for you to do two things. Number one, I need for you to like, comment, and subscribe and share this with other people who may have known someone who may have heard some experiences that you want clarified. I want you to ask questions. I want you to drop comments into the stream. We are live on Facebook and on YouTube. And before we begin, make sure that you know that Lott Carey will be in session in Greensboro, North Carolina next week. We look forward to seeing all of you there. And if you are not there because you're not able to get there, please stay tuned because there will be some events that you'll be able to participate in. Here on the Lott Carey Wise Digital Couch, we always encourage and explore critical conversations about advocacy, about activism. And tonight we're going to be talking about those who have had particular lived experiences. Please join to the Digital Couch, Reverend Dr. Harold Dean Trulear. Greetings, sir.
How are you?
I am blessed and I am very thankful that you took the time out to sit with us in order to chat with us. I'm going to actually let you introduce yourself. Many people do know who you are, but if they do not, you are the better person to give yourself your platform. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me, and give honor to Dr. Stewart and the officers of the convention, and my friend Reverend Dr. Angelita Clifton for the recommendation. Had the chance to work with her over the years, and the Fountain Baptist Church of Summit, dear friends and real advocates of compassion around this topic and the people involved. I teach at Howard University. I've been there about 20 years, and excuse me. I also direct a national project called Healing Communities USA, where we train congregations to get involved in prison reentry and prison ministry by beginning with the families in the local church who are directly impacted, their sons, their daughters, their parents, their siblings. And a lot of that for me is very, very personal because it's like the old days. There used to be a commercial called the Hair Club for Men, where the guy would come on at the end and he'd say, "I'm not just the owner, I'm a client." And I'm not just the director of this ministry, but I am a formerly incarcerated person. My inmate number was 1000268, George W. Hill Correctional Facility in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. And I was incarcerated for multiple convictions of driving under the influence. I am now a recovering alcoholic, and I give God the glory for deliverance. And so these, it could be anybody, right? It could be anybody. A lot of images of what does a formerly incarcerated person look like. Tonight, he's on your show.
Thank you very much for sharing not just where you have walked, but what you have talked and what you have lived. And so we are definitely going to uh, address some lived experiences and not just lived experiences isolated, but within the family structure, within the social structure, within the community structure. And then because we're on this particular in this particular conversation, within the structure of the church and the house of worship and the spiritual and religious community. So in that light, um, we are, of course, a missional organization, and you have definitely done your heart's work and your life work connecting to the people, the politics, the let's say the theology of those who need help and those who need support. And there's definitely a difference, though, between theology, like the thinking of it, and then the practicality. And so
Mhm.
that's definitely what I'd like to have us talk about tonight. And I know I actually I did a little bit of homework, I have to say. And so you actually you had a sermon at Wheaton College where you talked about the like mm, the space between experience. Let me get it right. The space between experience and like ideology, or so like again the thinking and the
Ex-
doing.
Experience and expectation.
There we go. Experience and expectation. And I'd like for you to give us a word about that. And I know, and it was actually a very relevant scripture or like Bible story that connected with that. So if we could sort of lead with that and then get into the
Sure.
conversation of what happens when people are within facilities, what are the things that they go through and how churches can provide support while they are within that moment, and then at the time that they make their transition and they are returning.
Mhm. Well, that sermon is based on Philippians 4:13. So many of us love that passage. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, right? Paul makes that statement, and Paul makes that statement while he's in jail. And he's making it in a letter to a church that's supporting him while he's in jail. So we set that context up because we like to look at that scripture as sort of a blank check from Jesus to do whatever we need to do. But Paul is actually talking about how he's enduring his sentence, how he is handling being incarcerated. And so the it's not and in the sermon, it's not, if it meant what some Christians think it means you could fly a plane in the name of Jesus, right? But if your pilot announced, ladies and gentlemen, I'm your pilot, and I've never flown a plane before, but I've got the pilot anointing, hallelujah, you'd get off the plane. So the context of that word, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, is Paul saying I can handle my incarceration because of Christ in me. The whole thing about experience versus expectation is that Paul's expectation for his life was to be a leader of the Pharisees. He gives his credentials earlier in the book of Philippians. Pharisee of the Pharisees, tribe of Benjamin, studied under Gamaliel. But his experience took him into incarceration. And so there's none of us that when we are born, our parents say, one day you're going to be locked up. We all have expectations of greatness, of significance, and that's true even for those people behind bars. Their expectation is one way, but their experience is taking them someplace else. And so what I've tried to do in that particular sermon is to reframe incarceration for those of us who are left behind, as and so that we look at two things. One is that nobody starts off saying, I want to go to prison. Nobody starts off that way. We make decisions that take us there, but nobody starts off with that as a goal. And then the second thing is, in your church, there are people who are the parents, the grandparents, the children of incarcerated men and women, and they never expected to be raising someone who was going to prison. They never expected to have a grandchild going to prison. And so there's a gap between their expectation and the experience of having a loved one that's incarcerated. Psychologists tell us that people who have those kinds of losses actually experience grief, just like when somebody dies, you have grief in the family. Your mother dies, you grieve your mother's loss. Parents of incarcerated children, young children, adult children, experience a sense of loss because this is not what they expected from that child. However, the loss is what psychologists call um, disenfranchised grief. Disenfranchised grief. It's a form of grief and loss that nobody pays attention to. That's why it's called disenfranchised.
Sorry. Thank you very much for sharing that. What I need to say at this moment is I need my stream team. My stream team, you know what I need. The other thing I needed to ask for people to do is to take notes while we are talking, because some of this conversation is a bit scripted because so we know like the main topics, but things that are gems that are just get dropped by myself or Dr. Trulear are touching and are going to prick the heart of people. So when you hear something that's like, oh, I need to remember that, or you want me to put it up on the screen or ask a question, please drop it into the chat. I'm actually watching YouTube and Facebook. So if you see my eyes sort of darting, I'm actually just looking for something to pull up for us to continue and fuel the conversation. So can you just repeat that last thing that you just said? Because that's why I'm like, oh my goodness, someone needs to write that down.
Okay. When a person experiences a sense of loss, but no one is recognizing the loss, they go through disenfranchised grief. And so when your son goes to prison, your mother goes to prison, then you feel the loss of that person, but you don't have permission to grieve. You don't have, let me put it this way, if your son dies, then the church recognizes your grief. How do I know that? There's a funeral, there's a viewing, there's a repast, there's a ceremony at the graveside. People bring food by the house. There are all of these rituals we have to acknowledge your grief because your son has died. If your son goes to prison, you're grieving his loss, but there's no recognition. In fact, what we found is that mothers of incarcerated sons often feel responsible for that son going to prison. And sometimes we in the church can make them feel that way.
Can we pause there for a minute? I think actually we need to sit
Absolutely.
on that for a moment. We need to sit on that for a moment. And I'm going to restate from my lens. We know there is a travesty. We know that there is loss. We are able to, and it is expected that we announce that loss, that we announce that moment of grief and grieving. When it comes to a moment of incarceration, and let's be even more real, if the person was in a place and space where their actions, thoughts, words, or deeds brought them to that space, or if it was like not just not expected, but like misappropriated or, wrongful, even if it's a wrongful judgment, there are times that the family will say, that's family business. We don't talk about family business outside because even if the person is wrongfully convicted, the thought is, well, why would they convict them? They must have been doing something. And so as a society, we're not, unless it's within your small circle, we're not allowed to sort of share that because, well, what'd you do? Where were they? What was they doing? What were they dressed like? Did they have the hood on? Were they with a group of people? So I'm thankful that you shared that because I never saw that from that perspective until you said that. Let those people who are in the chat, if you share or have had that experience or been witness to that moment where you've said, you can't talk about that, you can drop that in the chat. This is a safe space, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Now there's so many women, especially that I've met. I know we're talking about we have this emphasis on ending violence against women, and there's a certain violence to silencing the mother of an incarcerated man. To say you can't talk about the hurt, the pain, and on top of that, to feel a sense of responsibility. I show my students at Howard a documentary called Mother's Day, the unforgotten, I'm sorry, the forgotten victims of death row. And it's a documentary around women who have children who have been sentenced to death. And these women talk about how people look at them and say, what kind of a mother are you that you would raise a monster like that? And they bear the shame. Um, my students read a book called His Name is Ishmael by Dr. Tracy Blaylock Phillips, a pastor in Detroit. Dr. Phillips' son is doing double life in Florida. And one of the things she talks about is how the church didn't know how to approach her, and how um, the church, for a little while they were sort of there, but they looked at her as being somehow defective because her son was sentenced to prison. Now, in his case, he was not guilty of what he was charged with. He was one of those wrong place, wrong time, wrong behavior, but he didn't pull the trigger, but he got framed for it. It doesn't matter. It still hurts. Now, I went to jail for drunk driving. My mother sat in the courtroom with me. I was 50 years old. My mother was, I can't say how old she was, right? Okay. And my mother's sitting there crying. I said, Mom, what's wrong? She says, what could I have done differently so you wouldn't end up like this? It's a common theme for mothers to feel responsible for their children's mistakes.
Can
And
I
it's
ask this
common.
question?
Go right ahead.
So
Go right
you
ahead.
said it's the mother's, like it's her burden to bear, it's her cross to bear. Can I just ask what his according to the writings, according to the white papers, what cross does the father get to bear if he bears anything?
There is a pain there. I was focusing on the mothers because of
Okay.
the women focus, but yeah, the fathers do too. But fathers are more easily disengaged. And in the case of a number of men who are incarcerated, the fathers are not even present. And so when 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 I'm trying to get churches into this space, churches that don't have prison ministries, churches that have already demonized and stigmatized the incarcerated person, what I try to start with is the grief of the mother who's sitting in your pew, the grief of the mother who's singing in your choir, the grief of the mother in your church who greeted you at the door with her arm behind her waist, right? So I'm trying to create an on ramp into the redemption and restoration of men and women who are incarcerated by humanizing them, because the system dehumanizes them. They give us a number, they put us in a cage, they take away most of our choices for the day, and so it's hard to humanize though because of the mistakes that we've made. But that mother, that's still her son, and yes, that's that father, that's still his son. I do have a lot of experience with fathers, some grandfathers. Unfortunately, some preachers, oh my God, male preachers who have kids that are locked up, they wear shame to the max. Don't want to talk about it. I've had them get up and walk out of my seminars because they didn't want to talk about it and they didn't want to deal with it because their son was an embarrassment to them. I went to speak at a women's prison once in a certain state. I won't say what state it was. And the women afterwards came up and said, "Oh, are you going to be in Iowa long?" I said, "Yes, I'm speaking at the prison today, and then such and such a day. Sunday, I'm preaching at church." They said, "What church?" I told them the name of the church. They said, "Oh, his son across the street in the prison over there." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah. You gonna talk about that there? Because I know he don't like the fact that his son locked up." And so there's a shame that the family bears. And what I'm doing is not condemning the shame. What I'm saying is that the church has to be the place that embraces people who have shame so that they can heal. The shame is a wound. They need to be healed, not scolded, not having more shame, not shaming them for feeling ashamed, but they need to heal. And so I'll walk with a pastor whose son is locked up. We encourage, one of the things we do when I go out to preach in churches, I give an altar call for families of the incarcerated so that the church can see how many people in their congregation have been impacted. And I encourage every pastor to do this. I can tell you, Ms. Laurier, in 15 years, I've never had an empty altar. Go ahead.
I'm trying to imagine that. I'm trying to imagine that. I'm envisioning you doing that altar call. And anybody who's watching, envision that altar call. Think of what happens in that moment. Whatever the words are, those who are connected, affiliated or with someone who is being incarcerated, would you come to the altar to pray? Like, just think about that. What's the first thing that's going to happen? Everybody don't say it at once. In my mind, it would be, who getting up? Not me. And then there must be some prickling of the heart, some prickling of the mind that would then say, now I know people know. And I sure know that I'm doing some grief right here and I can't figure it out and I need some help. Let me just get up. And there's the one. And then there will be the next. And the next. And I can envision those people sitting in the pews and in the rafters saying, child, I ain't know. Or, we all knew. I was wondering when he or she was going to get up. Like, can you just hear? Because, we all from a Baptist church, so you know how we do. But then the reality that, yes, it is my reality. And I don't care what y'all say. I need to go through this grief with my church. Thank you for saying that it is grief like death, because I've never heard of it like that. And so the stages of the grieving process for someone who has transitioned, in my mind now, has to be parallel with the stages of grief for someone who is now not within the family unit and living amongst us and is now in a correctional. If y'all ain't get that, I got it for you. Go ahead, sir.
It is. It's the same, anger, denial, bargaining, acceptance. It's the same process, right? And so these are folks that are hurting. One of the reasons I believe, and I think you nailed it in terms of the process. One of the things that makes people come to the altar is the grief hurts, and they finally have safe space. There's your key phrase: safe space to say, yes, my son is locked up and it hurts. That's one of the reasons I give my inmate number at the beginning of the sermon, because I've already said I've been to prison. I give my number so that people, and I tell stories from prison. I one of the stories I tell is of being shamed myself that I was locked up, very ashamed, and I didn't want anybody to know who I was. Good luck with that. I had pastored one of the largest churches in that county, but I thought I could get away with it. And week two, young boy comes up to me and says, "Pastor, what are you doing in here?" And I'm looking at him and said, "Son, I don't know you." And he says, he tells me his name. I don't know you. He says, "I used to play drums in your choir." I'm like, don't remember you. Then he called his mother's name. I knew his mother. His mother was on my staff. And before my bid was up, I met 7 guys on my unit whose families I had pastored earlier that decade.
So they called you out on the hall.
Yeah, yeah. And one guy, on visitation day, um, somebody came to visit him, and I was visiting with, I had a visitor as well, and his visitor kept staring at me. And when we got back on unit, I said, "Man, who came to see you?" He said, "That was my mom." I said, "Why was she staring at me?" He said, "Oh, she thinks you used to be her pastor, but I told her you from Philly, so it couldn't have been you." I said, "What church?" He called the name of the church. I said, "Yeah, it was me. I was her pastor." 7 guys. So, so your church people may not self-disclose. I mean, nobody told me when I was the pastor that they had sons that were going through the system. I think maybe one person did tell me, but there was no train. I had no training at the time, so I didn't know. I went to go visit him, and the sheriff said, "Pastor, you can't just come in here and visit. This ain't a hospital. You got to fill out paperwork and all that." So I thought I could just put my shirt on backwards and walk in like I was going to a hospital, you know. So I obviously know better now, but the fact was that there were so many young men in my jail that were connected to the church that I had pastored. And so when I do the altar call, or when the pastors that we work with do altar calls, uh, people come. A couple times, wasn't quite sure. I was at a church in Virginia and gave the altar call, and nobody moved. And a little 5-year-old boy stood up and he started pulling on the woman that was with him.
A little
And
child shall
he's
lead them.
talking. And I found out later he was telling his grandmother, he's talking about daddy. We should go up there. And so he stood up and pulled her up to the altar, and then 40 people followed.
Come on,
And
5-year-old. Come on, tell the truth. What?
it's and
Woo!
see, and it's an opportunity for the church to show compassion to the mothers to get them through the grief. I preached at one church and I did the altar call, and this stunningly beautiful woman came forward. She's mid-30s, about 6 feet tall, looked like she just stepped off the front of a fashion magazine. You would never know that she was grieving, but you would if you were at that altar. She was doubled over crying. Two women came up to her. We had done a training on Saturday. I preached on Sunday. Two women came up. One grabbed one arm, one grabbed the other arm. The one who grabbed one arm was in her 50s, and she said, "Baby, it's all gonna be all right. My son's locked up. He's going. My husband's locked up. You're gonna be okay." The other was a senior citizen, a nurse. She had the little nurse's uniform on. She said, "Baby," and I could hear them from the pulpit, "Baby, it's gonna be all right. When I was your age, my husband was locked up, but you're gonna get through this, right?" So then the pastor says to me, "Would you go down and pray for her?" I said, "No." He said, "But why not? She needs prayer." I said, "I know that." He said, "Then go pray for her." I said, "No." He said, "Why not?" I said, "Because her two members are doing it right now."
It,
I said,
hold on. Wait. I was actually going to ask you to pause there, a little pregnant pause, because I actually wanted the people to be like, why? Because those who knew the work and who walked that walk, they was right there. They
"Yeah."
was right there. Not to take away from the man of God, not to take away from the preacher of the house, not to take away from the leader and the shepherd and all that. The leader gives the word. It is more powerful unless that person has walked that walk for the people right in the pews
Mhm.
to do the preaching there. Oh, I love it. I love it. Oh, sir, one moment. I actually want to bring up two messages that have come
Okay.
up. And read them because they are extremely timely. So I'm going to bring it up and then I'm going to read it. So this is a statement. It may not be right, but I think this happens to do with mothers. I think that it's only natural that a parent, mother specifically, feels shame because no matter the age, we feel responsible and wonder what we did wrong. How many of us would say when our children do things outside of or contrary, let's use the older folks' terms, contrary to what we done taught them, what did I do wrong? I thought I raised you right. I brought you to Sunday school, shined your shoes, taught you how to put the offering in the plate, taught you how to sing on the choir, taught you how to be on the usher board. How you gonna go do that? Here's the other. This is an enlightening conversation. Never thought how the person outside would feel isolated. And then this last one, the hidden burdens of church members. Ooh, somebody keep that. That'll preach. Or that'll be a
Mhm.
good workshop. Those of you who are in leadership ministry in your church. I'm just saying. Woo! Okay. really holding back a tear here. So we have the grandmother, we have let's say the mother of the church. I'm giving like an age category. We have then the grandmother, who's one on the left and one on the right, shoring up this mother or this woman who's going through. It is that intergenerational gap that we are trying to continue to build bridges. Like Carey Wise is actually doing that. We're trying to sort of, empower people across the ages. There are other churches who are, the phrase would be building capacity, right? Building down, of course, like shoring up the next generation of who's going to lead. Because I've heard over the past 15, 20 years, the older at this moment, or that at that moment, the older men of the church saying, there's a little feedback, saying, well, who's going to take over? Who's going to continue? And it's right here. It's right where you are. And like you said, when you call out the one, 40 more people gonna come up.
Mm-hmm.
You can't even plan that.
No.
You can't even plan that. Thank you for doing that. So what's the end of that story about these two women shoring her up on the other side?
Well, I told the pastor that it's more important that her church members pray for her, who are there with her and understand her situation, than for me to lay hands on her and then jump on the interstate and head home. I don't live up here. I can't run up here every time she has a prayer need, but they can because they're right here. And that's the church ministering to itself. Those are the members wrapping their arms around it. That's healing, to know that she's accepted in spite of the fact that her husband was in prison. I found out later her husband was in prison, and the father of, she had two sons, one by her current husband and one by a former husband, and both of those men were in prison. So both baby daddies were locked up. She needed her church. She didn't need, yeah, I could have prayed for her, but she really needed her church to walk with her, because now, and then I found out that she had been in prison too. So now she's got her boys back. She needs her church to walk with her. And I love the comment that, it may not be right, but women do feel responsible. And I think that what's critical is that the church come alongside these women who feel responsible. Let them know that it's all right, that you did the best you could. That's what I had to tell my mother. But I told my mother, said, what she said, what could I have done differently? I said, Ma, you weren't perfect, but whatever you did wrong, I should have undone it in the last 30 years I've been on my own. This ain't on you. Okay. Um, I have to take some responsibility myself, but I get it that parents feel that way. But because I have my church ought to be able to walk with me through that so that I can forgive myself, get over the grief, get over the shame, set up a proper boundary between my behavior and my son's behavior, set up a proper boundary between my behavior and my daughter's behavior, because at a certain point, people have to be responsible for their own actions and their own behaviors. And so it's the opportunity for the church to minister to the family that's left behind. And once those families are surfaced, then what we encourage the church to do is to treat the prison the way you treat the hospital. Now, what do I mean by that? When a church does ministry to the sick, they don't choose a hospital and show up at that hospital once a month. They minister to people in the hospital or the nursing home based on who's connected to their church. Right? You have a sick and shut-in list in the bulletin.
Yeah.
You don't have a list of everybody in your local hospital. You have a list of people that are connected to your church. So once I know who the mothers are, the grandmothers, the children of the men and women are very important to this. I know we're going to get to that in a moment. Once I know who they are, that's who should get the ministry. Cards, phone calls, visits. Right? I know
Oh,
it's hard. It's harder with COVID, but it's still possible. You can still send letters. Stay connected. There were 7 guys on my unit from the same church. That church, if I had known then what I know now, we would have been connected to them. The little church that my wife pastors here in Maryland, we have a list of everybody in our small church who's got somebody who's locked up. I took a call today. I took a call today from one of our members. Her brother was abused by a corrections officer. She's got the paperwork. So I can't minister to him directly because he's in a different state, but I can. I sent him cards. I sent him letters. Um, we have, I'm putting her in touch with some people in that state because if he was in a hospital in that state, we'd do something for him. And now I have a responsibility to the sister to make sure she's okay, to pastor her, because she's not only grieving the loss of her brother, he's been gone a while, but now help, she has that helpless feeling. My brother is being abused and there's nothing I can do. And I've got to do more than say, well, just pray for him. He'll be all right. She ain't feeling that. So I've got to walk with her and at least make some effort. I connected her with some advocacy groups in the state where her brother is. Because if he were sick, but that's what we would do. And so um, it's an avenue into the prison, just like we have avenues into the hospitals and avenues into the nursing home. It's based on who we're connected to, not just, if your church decided, our hospital ministry, we're going to go to the local hospital once a month, which is what most prison ministries do. Y'all Baptists, I'm Baptist. Y'all call it church meeting. Pastor said we're not going to visit the sick anymore. We're just going to go to the local hospital once a month. Y'all have a church meeting, right? So, anyway, and by the way, I saw somebody for trauma informed ministry. Absolutely, one of the things that we have to understand is that people that we're dealing with who are moving through the system more often than not have been traumatized at some point in their lives, and a lot of it is acting out of unaddressed trauma. And so we've been talking with the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. They are beginning to install trauma um, trauma informed corrections in that state. We're working with people in a couple of other states who are looking at that. And then we're trying to say to churches that we cannot repeat the trauma on people who are coming home from prison. It's traumatic. My book, Ministry with Prisoners and Families, which came out in 2011, it actually came out the week I got out of jail. My book, Ministry with Prisoners and Families, we actually have a chapter on dealing with trauma because just coming home from prison it has a certain level of trauma to it. Being in prison has a certain level of trauma to it. And I'm sure that the person who put that comment up knows this even better than I do, that when we talk about trauma, we're not talking about um, just having a bad experience. We're talking about an experience that's so painful that it actually rewires the brain, and the brain itself has to heal. And so we definitely need more trauma informed ministry for people who are moving through the prison systems, for women, especially because one of the things, let me just say this real quick. Most of your viewers have heard of the school to prison pipeline, right? When we're talking about women, we don't talk about the school to prison pipeline. We talk about the abuse to prison pipeline because, by most estimates, somewhere around 3/4 of all women who are incarcerated were at some point abused, either abused as children, sexually abused as children, or as adults or as teenagers. We talk about the pipeline is from abuse to self-medication. That's a fancy term for addiction, to criminalized behaviors to support your addiction, to prison. And so, one of the things that that your viewers should know is that when you're dealing with a woman who's incarcerated, the likelihood is that she has both an abusive past and an addictive past. Now, is that how we want to handle women who've been abused and have turned to drugs and alcohol to self-medicate? Is prison what we want for them, or do we want to create more rehabilitative spaces? Do we want our churches to be places that women can turn to when they're abused, as opposed to turning to drugs and alcohol? Because that's another thing we can't even talk about in church, right? Can't talk about abuse. Um,
Well,
and
actually,
so,
we can, and we have on the Lott Carey Wise digital couch. Good, y'all go check back on the videos because we've been handling it, and
good,
some you know we have.
good,
Hmm.
good. No, but it needs to be discussed because it is. Um, we create in church an incredible amount of trauma in women by ignoring their abuse, and that when self-medication becomes an option and then criminalized behavior, that's who we see when we go into the prisons, when we go into the women's prisons. I made a statement. I preached at a church, a women's prison once. I won't call the state. And I was actually preaching on Philippians 4:13, but because I was preaching in the prison, they had a little different angle. I was talking about um, a connection between Paul and the church at Philippi that occasioned the letter, and letting the women know that we've got folks that want to be connected to you, right? And so I told the story of my last arrest and how afterwards I asked one of the women that I worked with to pray for me. And so we held hands, we bowed heads, older woman, and all of a sudden she stops. And this is a woman who lived in California. I lived in Pennsylvania. We were at a conference and I was getting ready to go to jail to report. She says to me, "Is your car white?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I see your car." She says, "Were you arrested next to your house, near your home?" I said, "Yeah, I passed out in the driveway." She said, "I see you." And I see the
Wait, she didn't.
Lord.
Wait. She didn't know you from before this.
She knew me, but she'd never seen my car. She'd never been to my house.
There are seers everywhere. Tell, I'm okay.
I mean, it's a shame that Baptist. No, I'll leave that alone. But
Oh, you
God
can
does
go
speak,
there
still
because we
speaks
on the
to folk.
couch.
God still speak to folk, right? People say, well, the spiritual gifts went. No, no, there's still discernment. There's still gifts of wisdom. There's still gifts of knowledge. The Lord showed her a picture of me in the spirit realm, in my car, white car, passed out. And then she said, I see the Lord tapping the policeman on the shoulder and saying, "Go get my son. It's time to get him off the street." And then she grabs my face and she pulls it up like only an old church woman can do. It makes me look at her in the eye and says, "Son, you were not arrested, you were rescued."
Woo!
And when I told that story in that women's prison, it was pandemonium. Pandemonium. The women were screaming. It's like Oprah had showed up and given away cars. And I didn't understand it. I didn't understand it. And so I said to the pastor of the prison church afterwards, I said, "What was that? Please explain that to me." She said, "You just told their story. The women that are here, they see coming here as God rescuing them from life on the street, God rescuing them from their addiction, God rescuing them from an abusive husband or boyfriend." And so they see coming here, they said, a lot of them say that coming to prison was an answer to prayer. Now, what if the church was in a position to be an answer to prayer? Before I condemn somebody for saying, well, prison was an answer to prayer, but we're trying to close down the prison system. Well, then church, who are we going to be? Why can't we
Ooh.
be the alternative when a woman is being abused, a woman is struggling with addiction, when a woman has childhood issues that lead her to self-medicate and lead her to a life on the street, or lead her. I remember listening to a woman at Georgetown University. She was going to Georgetown, woman about 50 in her 50s, smart business suit. Um, and she was in the program that Georgetown has for formerly incarcerated folk. And this woman didn't look formerly incarcerated any more than I do when I got on my three-piece suit, right? And she talked about being on the street, being addicted, all that stuff. And she said, and one morning I was coming in from work in the street, and I looked and I saw people leaving the house and going to work. And I looked at them. I was just coming in from getting high and, you know, doing guys. And I looked at these people going to work. Some of them were women my age. And I said, Lord, I wish I could be one of them. I want to be one of them. She said, I got arrested the next day. And now on the other side of that, I'm one of them.
Right.
Why
Can
should she
I?
have
Can
to
I?
get arrested?
Right.
Why couldn't she
I
come to us?
right.
Go ahead.
I have not heard the perspective of incarceration. I'm trying to use the appropriate, or being in a correctional facility with a focus on correction as the answer to shifting, removing you from the dangerous situation that you were in order to bring you, whoever the you is, to a better state. Even though that seems very, very elementary, in my mind, as I've been raised, incarceration is supposed to stop you from doing that. The rehabilitation part sometimes happens while you are on that journey, and sometimes it happens after you finish that time and you are a returning citizen. Because you said it the way you said it, though, today, so I'm going to use the phrase I was today years old, that that period of time should be the time that, we get better. But if there is a push to close down that system, what is the domino effect to say to those people who need to be removed from that part of life to get themselves back together or to start a new life? If you're going to close it down, then yeah, what happens to the person that is in an abusive situation, right? Where they going to go? If it is a person who is self-medicated or self-harming through substances or people or activity, where they gonna go? What they gonna do? That means that the federal system has to design another institution that will work on immediate, what would it be, rehabilitation and remediation, right? So I just never thought of it like that. I want to actually bring up 2 or 3 comments that are really crucial. And I'm doing this because there are some people who are watching on Facebook. There are some people watching on YouTube, but things are happening on both places. And I just want to make sure that people are seeing all of this. So I'll just start with this. And I actually typed this because thank you very much, Dream Team, for putting some really good quotes and comments in the chat. So I said cards, letters, and phone calls are essential. So whoever it is feels moved to speak to their leader or to pray that their leader can think about having the sick ministry also now include those who are incarcerated as part of their outreach. Do that. Church members understanding what trauma is and includes. Yes. Okay. Here we go. Churches need trauma sensitive theology, and thankful to Dr. Clifton and the women in service everywhere of Lott Carey that we have spent the past, help me, either 2 or 3 years with, well, that's just since I've been active like this in trauma-informed ministry and reading texts and having really good critical conversations about what that looks like, trauma-informed ministry theologically, and then also on a pragmatic level. I did find your book that you talked about, ministry to prisoners and families. I believe this is yours. Yes, sir? This is the Amazon link. So I put that up. So if people are looking for that text, you can find it there. I think I did this. Yes. So you talked about the pipeline, and so the pipeline actually is from abuse to self-medication to criminalized behavior to prison.
For women, specifically for women. It's not that men don't have that, but that's the dominant line for women.
Right. And then here, trauma and addiction go hand in hand. Yes. And then here we go. So you just earn your license to operate in that space. Oh, I don't really. So whoever Facebook user is who said that, please like say more so I can actually put that back up so I know what that was connected to. Here's another person. It's a forced stop. Yes, this is about the incarceration period. It's a forced stop, and you get time to slow down and heal. The best conversations about transformation I've ever had has been in Edna Mayhem in Northern State. Oh, why do I?
Those are two
Let me
New
find.
Jersey prisons. I've been to both of them.
I think this is
I've
Dr.
spoken in
Clifton.
both of them.
I think
Okay,
this is Dr.
that's New
Clifton.
Jersey.
Right.
Okay.
And then here's one more. So it may not be the way we want to heal, but sometimes God puts us in a position that we have no choice, or whether we have a choice, make a change or not. Thank you so much. Oh, yes. So I think this is Dr. Clifton. It's 3 years. Thank you very much. Okay. Oh, sir, can I put this up?
It's
Insight-national.org.
insight-national.org. It's an organization that's working on solutions, alternatives to incarceration. You made the comment, if we shut down all the prisons, then where do we go? And this group, Insight, is working on some alternatives, and they're in conversation with, yes, I see it. Great. They're in conversation with women who are, I can't remember the name of the organization, but it's an anti-violence against women group.
Somebody
Because,
look it up. We'll find it.
okay, but what happens, they created this great statement that really looks at, okay, prisons aren't working. But then the violence against women folks said, well, if we're not going to put people in prison, what are we going to do with rapists? Okay, just being
Mm,
square up. And so these
mhm.
two groups got together and they began to talk about, how do we hold people accountable for crimes? What we're doing isn't working, um, but we have to hold people accountable. You don't just shut down prisons and let people do whatever they want. Some people may need to be do need to be isolated from the street, and so they came up with a joint statement about 20 years ago, and there have been a number of iterations of it. Um, the violence against women group and the anti-mass incarceration group coming together and talking about principles that we need to think about for holding people accountable, that are transformative and not simply punitive, and also protect public safety, specifically for women who are victims of violence. And so I'm sure you'll do the research, but you'll be, if you go to Insights webpage or look them up on Google, you'll be able to find the statement. Um, I wish I had it right in front of me. I have it.
I'm gonna see if I can find it.
Yeah. Okay. So the women in prison they have to deal with their addiction. They have to deal with family separations, another thing that we don't talk much about. um, Women who are incarcerated who have children experience more alienation from their children than the men, because, and this is an oversimplification, but it's the spirit of it, daddies go to jail, mommies don't. In neighborhoods that produce high numbers of people that go to prison, kids have seen fathers go. Some of them are even proud their fathers are locked up. My daddy's locked up. I had a student at Howard. You may have heard of him. His name is Nick Cannon. And yeah, Nick Cannon went to Howard. So Nick was in my ministry and criminal justice class, and I was talking about the pain that children feel when their father is locked up. Nick said, "Man, I was proud my daddy was locked up. I was bragging on it. In fact, when my daddy got out and went to seminary, I told him he was still in prison because I couldn't brag on him being in seminary." Um, I got the tape. Anyway, so they're people, badge of honor, daddies. My father's bad. My father's got street
Mm,
cred. Blah 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 blah. Mommies aren't supposed to go anywhere. and the alienation that women feel from their children, and the anger that children feel towards mothers for being absent is far greater than it is for fathers. And so the need for family reconciliation with the children is important. Another issue that's important for women, for being against violence against women, is that we are in the middle of a movement to end the practice of shackling pregnant women when they give birth. In many jurisdictions, if a woman is pregnant and she's in prison and she's pregnant, she's about to give birth, they shackle her and they put her in the ambulance and then they shackle her to the bed. Now, I've never been a woman, but I understand it's very difficult to run away when you're giving birth. Okay, real rap. A colleague of mine, Pamela Wynn, she and I went through a training program for formerly incarcerated leaders called Leading with Conviction in 2017. And Pamela and I are also linked because I went to Morehouse and Pamela went to Spelman, and we both went to prison. And so she gave birth in prison. She was shackled, led to the ambulance for her prenatal visit. And because of the shackles, I'm talking about wrists, ankles, waist with the chain, she tripped going into the ambulance and fell. When she got back to her cell, she miscarried. And she was in there with the dead baby for an hour before the corrections officer came in, cleaned up the blood, cut the umbilical cord, threw the baby in the trash, and then took her to sick bay.
Wait a minute.
You can read about it. Pamela Wynn, Winn.
Wait. Was that uh I'm absorbing this, but I have to ask the question, was that like uh the case that like spurned why we should not have this situation happen?
Yes. It actually brought an end to shackling pregnant women and putting them in solitary confinement in the state of Georgia. Her case, Governor Brian Kemp actually signed the bill into law based on her case and her advocacy. She's been on national television, British broadcasting, and a documentary is being made about her life. But she's just one of a number of women who have horror stories about being chained during birth, and then after giving birth, having no time with the child. We're one of the few countries in the West that doesn't give a woman time with her child after birth. There are prisons in Norway with special wings for women with children. And they designed them to look like nurseries and schools. It's not like, the kids in the cell with you. And so we've just begun to understand the price that a mother and a child pay when the child is born during incarceration, immediately separated from the mother. And all of the experts tell you the first 18 months of the time when children bond with their mother. And I have a very good friend who gave birth while she was in prison, shackled, baby taken from her, given to her mother. So that child spent her first 2 years with her grandmother. And when her mother came out, she wouldn't go to her. She had bonded with the grandmother. And my friend tells me that it wasn't until her daughter was in her 20s that they actually began to develop a mother daughter relationship.
So, if I may, and thank you for sharing this, and those people who are aware, and thank you for also helping me to do the stream team. Again, if you see my eyes darting left or right, I'm trying to sometimes go to another screen, find the information that Dr. Trulear is bringing up. And so I wanted to pull this up. Okay, so let me just pull this up. It takes years to reconcile the family. I typed this in: family reconciliation and care for pregnant women, including no shackling. Thank you to the person who typed in Pamela Wynn's name. And then I was looking for it and I found this is from the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. I think I'm saying it right. This is the article from the ACLU about prisoners' rights and the Pamela Wynn case. And then someone helped me find the Norwegian correctional model is really well thought out. Yes. So Sorry, there's a little feedback. Okay, just from an educational standpoint, there's feedback. I'm an educator by trade, and so part of our training, and I'd have to say this in the past probably 30 years, has been this focus on designing and taking into consideration women who are incarcerated, yes, who are pregnant, who give birth, who are at least trying to bond, yes, with their infant, toddler, preschooler. And so there are some, let's say, federal, how do I say it nicely? Um, let's just say federal mandates that apply to infant, toddler, and child care arrangements or structures in institutions in general. And then there are these subparts and subparts and subparts. And so depending on the state, like you were talking about in Georgia, depending on the state, they will then interpret for their community what that looks like. And so I do remember seeing a couple of documentaries about like what childcare looks like within the within incarceration settings. And yes, the same decor that should be available to children who are in preschool, or those whose families, yes, if the grandparents are raising the child, if the children come to do that visit, and how they try to at least normalize, if you will, and make that visiting space something that is appeasing and appealing and calm, even though the adult, the parent may still be in their confinement, in order to just make it as comfortable as possible. And so, yes, thank you again just for raising the issue of the grief, the stages of grief, the trauma that the parents who are raising the grandchildren of women who are incarcerated, the siblings. And so when you said something I wanted to just bring back up, when you said like when there is a physical death, how everyone converges, right? There's a moment of recognition. There's an actual marking. Let's put it like that, a marking. There's a funeral. There's the grief period. There's the structure that holds the body. There is the process of the grieving. And then where someone goes in who becomes incarcerated, or goes into a correctional facility, there is this like, there's the no talking. And I'm wondering, within our Black family structure, and within the safe spaces that families will allow that conversation to occur, what happens? And I'm sure there are studies and papers that address that. But what do we do? Do we sort of, let me at least come to the house and sit with you, or let's, like you said, go to the court and at least sit. Let's like I'm going to be silly, but I'm just thinking about what we do in families. Like, let's just, let's make some iced tea. Let's make some cake. Let me just sort of bring a little bright smile. Let's talk about what could happen. Let's look at the old pictures. And then I'm wondering, because this is what we see a lot when the person is released. Mm-hmm. Come on by the house. We're going to have a barbecue because somebody's home.
Sure.
The time in between, and then the time after they come home, or they were returning citizens, because that's what we should sort of focus on now. What then happens? Because it's not back to normal. So what, as we attempt to wrap up or get to the next part, what would we say? What would you say to the institution of the church, to families, of like how to welcome that person home, and what to do so that they can continue that next part of their life?
The starting point for reentry is the moment of arrest. The starting point for reentry is the moment of arrest. You build the relationship through the process of the arrest, the detention, the trial, the incarceration, so that you already have the relationship in place when the person comes home. Trying to build a relationship after the person comes home, it's not going to be very effective. You want to establish trust and a sense of caring prior to a person's release. Now, if you can't begin at the point of arrest. The person's already incarcerated. Begin the process now, because building strong relationships is one of the two keys to successful reentry: coming home and staying home. Having strong support system when you come home, and having a change of mind. Having a change of mind, making the kinds of cognitive changes that are necessary for you to be able to function properly on the outside. When I was at the detention center last week in Virginia, speaking to the guys that were preparing to come home, their community readiness unit, I said, whatever the character traits are you want to have when you come home, start working on them now. Somebody said, what if they don't work? I said, doesn't mean that. I said, then figure out how to deal with adversity when you're doing the best you can and it doesn't work. Guess what? That happens in the real world too. Whatever change you want to see in your life when you come home, make the changes now and practice them. And so people need a change of mind. We need to see the world differently. Um, you need to set goals. Help people set goals while they're still in, right? I talked to one guy. I said, "Man, what's your goal when you get home?" He said, "Not to come back here." I said, "That's not a goal." He said, "What do you mean it's not a goal?" I said, "You can't have a goal that's a negative goal." For example, I said, "Watch this. Don't think of a fire truck." What'd you just do? He said, "I thought of a fire truck." I said, "Exactly. You can't have a goal that says I'm not coming back. You need to have a goal that says what you are, and if you become that, then you won't come back." So I get into dialogue with guys before they come home and help build relationships. If your church knows who from the church is incarcerated, and you start writing letters, do visitation, keeping the connection going, and build a relationship before they come home, help them with the changes they need to make in their mindset before they come home. Then when they come home, you can welcome them. Okay. So and be a support to them. And why, and you know, help, you can help them find jobs. You don't have to turn to an employment agency. Find out who's hiring. Here in Prince George's County, Maryland, I have a good relationship with the guy who runs workforce development for the county. I I'm not trained to help people find jobs. I'm not trained to train people for jobs. But the county, this guy at the county is, and he's really good with people coming home from prison. You come home from prison to our church and our community, I send you to Pete Goodson. He knows how to do that, right? Build networks. In churches, you already built networks. You know how I know that? Because when somebody gets sick, you don't give them any medicine. You have a network with a doctor. Now, you may pray for them to be healed, but you have a network with the doctor. When somebody dies, you don't dig a hole in the ground and stick them in there. You have a network with the funeral director. You're already networked. Don't be afraid to network with helping organizations that can do what you're not trained to do, helping them find jobs, helping them find houses. You don't have to build
So
houses. Go ahead. So build networks. Go ahead.
right. So I will say this concept is new, or the admission to the concept is new. I'll say that because for most of us it may be 1 or 2 or 3 degrees of separation of you knowing somebody within your direct or indirect family. I'm just saying, who has had this experience or living this experience. Tell the truth. And I'm thankful that I am more aware of small businesses or even large businesses or institutions who have in place spaces for people who are returning in the workforce, so that when, and I don't know the process, but when they're going through the probationary period or having the probationary conversation of, okay, here are places that we already have a list, right? The networking of places that are will accept. We're aware that you've either had skills prior to incarceration or developed skills while you were there. And so if it's within the food industry or, you know, whatever the industries are, And of course, they're based on the charge. There, of course, there are certain situations where you're not able to go to because of whatever it has happened. But I'm thankful that I'm becoming aware of, again, those institutions that are welcoming, and that are partnering with probationary officers, or that process. And then those spaces that are still like, nah, we're not going to do that. Let us be at least the church or the space or the community that works with our elected officials, or who works with the activists to fuel, uh, and to funnel. That's the better word. To funnel, yeah, to fuel and to funnel people into that work. And I will say, and depending on where you are, um, there are, help me, there are, there's a, let's just say it's an organization about keeping younger people from doing the wrong thing. And I'm just going to say that in general. And so a number of the people who work in that space are people who have already had moments. And so their goal, and I'm, as an educator, I'm saying that because I see it in my community. And those people who live in New York, you know, the orange truck, you know, the folks that wear orange, right? And so they walk through places and spaces in high densely populated areas, and they are a presence, and they make connections with schools in order to say to younger people, listen, almost like a, I want to say like a community scared straight. I hope I'm saying that right. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Where they make contact with, whether it's high schools or community centers or whatever, in order to say, hey, listen, we see that there's some activity. Let's just give you the real deal. We want to be supportive. But some of those people that who are working in those spaces have already had that experience. The same way with like rehabilitation, whether it has to do with drug and alcohol, substance abuse. The better people to do that work to help, right, to help people are those who have had similar experiences, so that they can actually relate. Am I right? I'm,
Yeah, yeah, and they're out there. They're out there. There's an organization that you may have heard of in New York called Youth Build. It's a national organization.
let me look it up. Go ahead.
Yeah, Youth Build. And it's been in existence for a long time, but a few years ago they elected a new president, new national director. His name is John Valverde. John is from New York City. When I met John, he was in my ethics class. He took ethics with me when I taught at New York Theological Seminary. Now, it wasn't the campus on 29th Street, it was the campus at Sing Sing. John was pulling a 20-year bid for taking another person's life. And so he was in New York Seminary, has a master's program at Sing Sing. John was in my class. Um, and I didn't even realize I was on a program at Herbert Lehman College. You're from New York, you know where Herbert Lehman is. I was at a conference there, and I'm sitting next to this guy,
Although
and
we say
we're
Lehman, we say Lehman.
Lehman.
Don't say Lehman.
Okay,
We're not
thank
gonna know what
you.
you're talking
So
about.
you
If
can
you say
tell
Lehman, it's Lehman, okay? Like
Lehman.
hospital.
All right, Herbert Lehman. Thank you. So you can tell I'm
Yes,
not from
sir.
New York. I'm from Philly. Okay. So we're at Herbert Lehman, and I'm on a panel with this guy, and he gets up before me and he says, "I'm really grateful to be on this panel with my professor." And I'm like, I don't know you. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my God! In my mind, I put a green jumpsuit on him, and I'm like, that's John. Okay. He was out, and he just recently became the president of Youth Build, the organization you have there on the screen, youthbuild.org.
Yes, I found it.
Um, and he's a perfect person to oversee work with troubled young people who need education. Oh, there's a great program, Credible Messengers, created by Clinton Lacey when he was in New York. Credible
Let me find that
Messengers is a
link. Okay.
program that trains men and women who've been through the system to go back and work with young people who are in the system and try to show them a better way, show them the benefit of the benefit of transformation. Credible Messengers, a tremendous program. Clinton Lacey was in New York at one point. He came down here to Washington, took over the juvenile justice system, and completely reformed it to be restorative justice. You could not work in a DC juvenile justice prison unless you bought into restorative justice practices. And by the way, this is a good time really quickly to say this. Real restorative justice always involves the voice of victims and survivors of crime. One of the things that I don't ever want to be accused of is being insensitive to victims, insensitive to people who've been hurt, insensitive to those who've been the victims of violence or the victims of robbery, or victims of the behaviors of addicted persons. And so, one of the things that is powerful about the restorative justice movement that Dr. Lacey's been a part of and others of us have been a part of is they always involve the voices of those who've been victimized because they need to be healed as well. And some churches, watch this, some churches don't want to do prison work because they have people that have been hurt by people who are incarcerated and no one's addressing them. Oh, he robbed my house and y'all and y'all didn't come and surround me when I was hurting, but now you got all this love for him. You know, you didn't come and surround me
That's
when I was
straight talk.
hurting after I got carjacked, but now y'all want me to go minister to the carjacker. We have it's got to be full circle.
That's straight
It's
talk.
got to be
That's
all of
straight
that.
talk.
And when people come after me on that, I always say, well, you've got to have a victims component. You've got to show compassion. And there's some good organizations right there in New York. You've got one called Common Justice.
Okay, let me go
Um,
find out. Okay, wait. Go
Common
ahead, keep
Justice.
talking.
They're in Brooklyn in the Bronx. They do restorative justice with violent offenders. They actually have created a diversion program for young men who are convicted of violent offenses. And out of the first 90 that came through the program, first when Charles Hines was the DA, and then when
Mhm.
this guy, I'm trying to remember, was it Eric Adams, was the DA? Um, Over 90% never reoffended.
Let me say this. If anybody is still here, and we actually have a lot of people who are still here, which I'm really thankful for, because we're on multiple platforms. If you weren't doing this before, when this broadcast is over, please just go back in the link, which is why I'm putting these links in the chat or on the screen. Take note. Oh, thank you for shouting out Eric Gonzalez. Yes, DA Eric Gonzalez. Um, take these links and share them with your missionary team, with your pastor first, and pray on it. Because if you have a prison ministry, excellent. Add these links as your research. If you do not, but you know that the family members are sitting in your pews, take note, because the last thing that you just said, Dr. Trulear, about we minister to the one who offended, but we tell the one who is the victim. Hopefully, we do more than this. Just pray about it. God will get you through. But
Yeah.
what kind of ministry do we do? And let me just say this. And this is also about, again, I'm part of a Black family. I'm Black. Because we want to keep these conversations and these things like silent. And so it's like, oh, I don't want people to know. And so we sit silent and we suffer in our seat. Those people who we tell, if we tell our pastor, and of course it's like, don't tell anybody. I don't want no people in my business. But he may know somebody, of course, who has walked that same walk. And so they could be like the elk, right? The 70-year-old and the 50-year-old, shouldering the 30-year-old to help and heal the brokenhearted takes community. And when we pick and choose when and to whom we're going to share so that we can go through healing, we can kind of shut ourselves off from the healing and make that healing a very slower and more painful process. And I've said this, and I'm of course I'm speaking as an outsider in this particular situation, but there are things that I've walked through as an individual, that until I shared the thing that was hurting, I didn't realize, like that one person who came and then 40 people came after, that when I got past myself and I was like, okay, listen, I'm just really tired of like dealing with it myself. And I said, listen, I went through something. I had this health issue and I thought I was alone. 10 people after I shared that was like, Doriel, I didn't even know that I could talk about it. I went through the same thing. And now we from across the aisle, every once in a while, we kind of look at each other and we do this. Then this is a Brooklyn thing. So if y'all not from Brooklyn, you don't know. But we kind of do this. Just a little small thing like, you good, you good. And it's that private thing. So this is another opportunity where we're speaking about a very tenuous and like, very painful conversation that in the spirit of community, in the safe space that you create, but that if God is who he is, if God is who God is, God will allow those people to surround you and not shame, to surround you to say, let us see how we can help. Let us see how we can be supportive. I'm going to bring up two more comments and then we can. Yes, sir. Oh, hell, thank you. Yes, I will put that up, sir. All right, 1 second. Let me go back. Here we go. So I'm just going to bring these up again. So we have youthbuild.org. We have cmjcenter.org. We have a comment. Dr. Lace is amazing. Yes. Transformative Justice Initiative is also outstanding. Fabulous. We have this comment. Thank you, Dr. Trulear. You're one of the best. I'm honored to call you my friend. I think this is Dr. Angelina. Thank you for sharing your insight in this necessary conversation. I've got to jump off, but you know how much I appreciate you, my friend. Excellent. You're always on point. Fabulous. And then, okay, I put up commonjustice.org. Folks, please take notes. Please take notes. Okay, here we go. Learn the difference between charity and justice. It's important. Yeah. Don't go with the high and mighty. Let me do my mission work. Keep that. Keep that. If you're not sincere about really bringing support, true support and transformation, leave that on the shelf. And here's a comment from Reverend Douglas Moore. Greetings, Reverend Douglas Moore. If you have time, can you please ask Dr. Trulear to talk about the importance of clergy visiting the incarcerated? Woohoo! How about we wrap up with that? Thank you, Reverend Moore. Appreciate that. Because you
Sure.
talked about
Thank
people
you,
visiting.
friend. Yeah, Douglas Moore's good people. I'm he's known my family since he was a kid. I just met him as an adult, but my cousin taught him science in high school. So we go way back, and his wife's from the same community as my uncle in South Jersey. Any rate, one of the things that we've discovered in research, this was done through the Minnesota Department of Corrections, that different categories of visitation to the prison have varying effects on whether or not a person will reoffend. And
Take notes.
they surveyed over a 5 year period, they studied the visitation patterns, and they found out that the, the visitation that is most likely to reduce recidivism is a visit from a clergy person, not from mom, not from the kids, not from a sibling, but when clergy visits incarcerated men and women, they are less likely to offend. And so all of us as preachers and pastors were taught to visit the sick. None of us were taught to visit the incarcerated. I think it's our responsibility. They're in the same list in Matthew 25. Sick folk, incarcerated folk. They're in the same list. Somebody said, well, I'm not called to prison ministry. Ain't nobody asking you to go be a prison minister. Just go visit. You're not called to be a hospital chaplain either. You still go to the hospital. My therapist tells me that sometimes my snarkiness is an asset, right? You know, you're not called to be a hospital chaplain. Would you go see people in the hospital? Just go visit somebody. If you got a son, a friend, and get a list from your church and visit. And that's what we do in healing communities. I gave you my website, Ms. Larrier, and that's what
Sir,
we
let me
do
pull it up.
with in our training. We trained over 1,000 churches in the 15 years we've been doing this work, and we actually, some of your viewers may remember that I did a training session for Lott Carey in 2021 when we had the virtual meeting in August of that
Yes.
year.
Yes.
So, um, yeah, so there was yeah, the more, if clergy visit, recidivism is less likely. And so we need to, as pastors, put the prisoners connected to our churches on our visitation list, just like those that are in the nursing homes and those that are in the hospitals.
So I'd like to ask those people who are watching, this is your call to action. I'm just going to be bold here. If your church has a sick list, a sick and shut in, and now I'm rethinking the whole shut in because people who are incarcerated are shut in. Did I do that? Did I do that, Dr. Trulear? Did I do that? Okay. So if you got a sick and shut in list, ask, of course, the person who is incarcerated if it's okay. Pray and make sure that you feel like, okay, you can take the comments and the questions. But if they were paying attention to this conversation right here, they would know that it's the process of transformation. And then add them to the list. Add them to the list. Add them to the list. This is a blessing. Thank you. Oh, thank you. And we have a person who remembers you coming to speak for. Thank you. Thank you, Sister Lottie. I appreciate you. This is incredible. If there are any final questions or comments, I'm actually going to look on my phone because this is on 3 different platforms. If there are any final questions or comments, I would love for you to put them up now. And then, of course, I can definitely bring them up or ask or share. Thank you. Here's one. Okay, just a comment. Thank you. This is quite insightful. So please do that
Thank you.
now. Please make sure I'm going to put this back up. Please, everyone, take this down. HealingCommunitiesUSA.com. HealingCommunitiesUSA.com. If your church does not currently have a healing ministry, a healing ministry for people who are incarcerated, I'm sure there's some info that is available at with a low barrier to access, if you know what I mean, to share. And then he's right here. He's right here. He's right here. Share this link to people who are within your church. Share this with your minister, with your board, with your prayer groups and your prayer circles. Because if you have not considered those who are incarcerated as part of the shut in, you can now. You can now. You can now. Oh, I have to put this person up. Wait, thank you, Dr. Trulear. Again, this is so enlightening. And let me put this final one up. Very insightful, Mom. Yes, Mom, I know you're watching. Shout out to my mom. Okay. I appreciate you. Dr.
My mom's
Trulear,
watching
you
the
have,
baseball.
say
My
it again.
mom's watching the baseball game. My mom's watching the baseball game tonight, so I'm sorry she can't watch. But I will let her know that I was with you all.
Please do. I'm going to take myself out just for a moment. I'm going to let you have the final word, the final sharing. I'm right here, and when you're done, I'll pop back in. Yes,
Okay.
please. This is definitely what we must share. So I'm going to let you have the stage, sir.
Oh my. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Lott, Carey, Dr. Stewart, Dr. Clifton, my friends that I, Sister McCoy and Reverend Moore, and for all of you who are tuned in for this tonight. I'm happy to be of support and assistance to any efforts that Lott, Carey, or your congregation want to engage in this area, both locally and internationally, because the prisons are part of our mission field. And then I'll say this in closing: if it's your grandson, it's really not mission field; it's pastoral care. It's all part of it. And I just thank God that my church, the church that I was a part of when I was incarcerated, walked with me from the moment of arrest through the detention process, through my trials. My pastor and head of our men's group were there. I got letters when I got work release. They brought lunch to my office, and then they welcomed me home. My church was a big part of my transformation going through the criminal justice system. And I pray that you can be that for someone as well. God bless you.
We appreciate you. We are blessed by your presence, by your candor, by your transformation and you sharing it with us and with your transparency. And if for nothing else, and if I know people are thinking it, but I'm going to say it publicly, you are truly an example of you took one step to the left. You got taken off of that step and off of that path. You went through a corrective stage. And look at you now. Look at you now. Because so many people think that, I made a step in a different direction and now life isn't. And it's the hope that is given to people. And I'm still reeling over the fact that, you're in the unit, as you say, and somebody recognizes you and is like, nah, that can't be Pastor so-and-so. You know what? It has to be somebody else.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, yeah, that was me. That was me. I'm very proud. I'm very proud and honored to have been able to engage with you for this time.
Thank you.
Yes, to those people, we are here for the time that we are here for, if you know what I mean. Please share this out again. Share it with the people who were not here. Share it to the people who may think, oh, what can my future be like? How about the professor at Howard University? How about that? How about that? How about that? Peace and blessings to everyone here. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode, which will be episode 30. It'll be episode 30. We will be here the first Thursday of every month. Please join us. Please stay connected to LottCarey.org, LottCarey.org, where we come alongside people, whether you are across the street, across the state, across the country, across the world. We come alongside and we support the efforts of sharing God, sharing the gospel, sharing good news, and also sharing grace. I just made that up. So we look forward to seeing you on the next conversation. And if you're coming to Greensboro, I'll see you there. Peace and blessings. Have a good night, everyone.